Welcome to the Cool Tools Show. I'm Mark Frauenfelder, Editor-in-Chief of Cool Tools, a website of tool recommendations written by our readers. You can find us at cool-tools.org. I'm joined by my co-host, Kevin Kelly, founder of Cool Tools. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, it's great to be here.
In each episode of the Cool Tools Show, Kevin and I talk to a guest about some of his or her favorite uncommon and uncommonly good tools they think others should know about. Our guest this week is Marc Wade. He's Director of Business Development for Messermeister, the leading manufacturer of premium handcrafted chef knives and culinary tools. He's an award-winning kitchen knife designer and developer, best known for his leading role in the development of the Shun brand. A second-generation knife maker, Marc began making knives at the age of 10. His innovative design approach has been highly influential in transforming the kitchen knife industry over 20 years of a professional career. He's credited on multiple international patents relating to knives and knife accessories and is a key figure within the housewares industry. With a long list of creative accomplishments, Marc has also worked on cutlery projects with major brands including All-Clad, Wiliams-Sonoma and Milk Street. He's collaborated with well-known personalities within the international food community such as Alton Brown, Michel Bras, Tom Colicchio, and Thomas Malzer, to name a few. Hey, Marc, how's it going?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, we're so happy that you can join us, and we're really excited by some of the suggested tools you have.
Yeah, I tried to mix it up. I mean, you have a knife guy on, so I am drinking coffee today. Usually it's drinking beer and talking knives, but we toned it down a little bit today.
That sounds good. Well, I mean, I have knives. I have a Messermeister that was sent to me to check out, and I cannot wait to find out how you sharpen it. You're talking about the WorkSharp MK2 sharpener. I'd love to hear about that sharpener and how you use it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as a knife maker, one of the most common things that we get in terms of, questions from the public are, how do I put an edge on this thing? How do I sharpen? Because no matter how good your knife is when you start, eventually, if you use it enough, it's going to need to be restored. And we kind of like some things about the world of sharpening and other things we don't like so well.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about cool tools. A few years back, I got to know a company, actually a U.S. company down in Southern Oregon, that has a history of making all the very cool things that we use to sharpen knives in a production setting, in a knife factory.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of collaborated on a project or two, and they've since grown into making knife sharpeners for the home. And they're amazing. I mean, it's really... it's little itty bitty versions of what we would see on a production factory floor. And they do it very differently. And they're about as crazy as we are when it comes to the knife world about, worrying about function first, not necessarily, the way convention says something's supposed to look or work.
Mm-hmm. So like for your own knives at home, do you hand hone them or whatever you call it, or do you use a little machine?
Yeah, I use a little machine for the most part. Of course, it depends on what I'm trying to accomplish, right? When you're talking about putting an edge on steel, you're really talking about abrasives and consistency, right? So the idea is to lock down a lot of variables, and that's what WorkSharp does really well. They use what's called a slack belt sharpening concept, which is a basic like a belt sander with a loose abrasive belt that spins. And the nice part about that is that, you can worry about holding the right angle and kind of moving the knife appropriately and not really have to worry about creating the friction between your abrasive and your edge. So it really simplifies the process. And the other cool thing about it is, we talk about not just the edge angle, but in knife making, it's a lot about the geometry of the edge. And whether it's concave or convex or a flat angle really makes a difference in terms of the cutting that you're trying to do. And when you have a machine that sort of demystifies all that, and then just kind of takes those variables and locks most of them down, you really get something that gives you maximum control and effect, at the end of the day.
So could you describe then this little machine, maybe what it looks like, how big it is, and
Yeah.
what you have to do to use it?
Yeah, so it's basically they have a delta mounted belt. In other words, three pulleys, and they have this loosely mounted abrasive belt on there, and it runs on a little motor, probably the same motor that you would use in a power drill, something like that. Um, they then everything else is really about giving you fixtures and platforms from with to rest the knife and control
Mm-hmm.
the speed and the abrasiveness, the coarseness of the abrasive rather. And so the probably the best part though about these machines is kind of the back of the package. And what I mean by that is that, they have a chart that you do kind of slips out. This is cardboard thing, and you
Mm-hmm.
can mount it on the wall, and it says, if you're trying to restore, a fine edge on a hard piece of steel, then it gives you the settings. You slow the abrasive down so you don't create more friction than you need, and then you use this belt, and then you can take that belt off and easily put another one on. So the size of it, well, it's about like a power drill. It's got fixtures both right and left that are platforms that kind of give you the right angle on the to the abrasive, and then a speed control. That's all it is. But the results are amazing, and it gives my preferred edge, which as the slack in that belt kind of gives a little bit. What you're left with is this almost teardrop shaped edge or apple seed edge, be saying like kind of the custom knife world, an apple seed edge, and a little bit of arc to it. So it's very, very sharp, but it's also very strong. It doesn't thin out that fine edge of the blade too much. Yeah. So, I mean, it's totally different. It's not one of those, pull through wheel things that are kind of edge destruction devices.
Oh, really? Is that,
Yeah.
that's what I have now?
Well, those are convenient, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as you're getting into something, kind of like better than nothing at all. But the reality is, the most important thing when you're talking about anybody who's doing sharpening on a higher order is the ability to control the speed and the abrasive. And you change that. And pretty much all knife makers are going to talk about a progression from coarse to fine. And the idea there is that you're setting an edge, and then you're kind of polishing it out in stages until it's nice and glassy, so it cuts really well. And if you can do that with the same machine, right, and just kind of dial down the settings as you go, then you're going to get the best results as opposed to like kind of a one shot pull through kind of deal.
I'm imagining that there might be kind of knife sharpening enthusiasts who would claim that they could do it better by hand. Do you think that's true, or do you think that this machine is so consistent that you actually could get a better sharp on this using this machine versus by hand, even if
Yeah,
you
I
were
know.
good?
Yeah, you bet. I think that's true, but I think that's also that there are people out there who could do a better job on a stone. And honestly, I do use stones. We sell a lot of stones through our brand, and I use them quite effectively, but on certain knives, right? Um, the thing is that's probably less than 5% of the population of the knife using world out there cares enough to develop the skills to do that. I learned sharpening by hand in Japan, in Seiki, actually, from masters, right? That kind of like stood over you and scowled whenever you got your fingers a little bit out of alignment or whatever. But I'm a little bit nuts, right? I've been doing this for 40 years, and and I love the craft of it. But for the most of us, if you just want it sharp and you want it fast, and your wife hands you a block of a dozen knives, you don't really want to, even me, I don't want to sit there and do that over the sink for, an hour or two. And so,
Yeah.
so a small machine that does an incredibly adequate job much more quickly is definitely a great option to have.
And it's $100, which is very affordable. And it looks, I mean, it's hard to judge something by the way it looks, but it looks like a solid piece of equipment, and it looks really cool.
Yeah, it looks very functional because it's sort of what's the word? Its function is transparent because of the exoskeleton, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right.
So the idea is that it's basically it's a belt, little tiny belt sander that's exposed, and then it's exposed because you get to change the belt as you move up to a finer grit.
Exactly. Exactly. And you said it, you hit the nail right on the head. It's about simplicity and design. And that's a theme as a designer, developer of, hand tools. That's what knives essentially all boiled into is hand tools. I'm always, motivated by the simplicity of the design. And if it looks intuitively simple and it's approachable, then people will use it. And that's half the battle,
Okay. So this is called the Sharpener MK.2. I don't know what that is, but anyway, that's what the one you're pointing to is. Okay, the workshop. So tell us about another one.
This one looks cool.
Yeah, it does look cool. Mark, what else you have for us?
Well, the avocado. Have you guys heard of this thing?
No, never.
Okay. So, as a knife guy,
I've heard of avocados, but I'm sure
the avocado. No, the quado. So it's funny, hey, I'm the kitchen knife guy, right? So I try and keep it in my world of expertise. And, I love the avocado because it's designed by a company called Shun, which is a division of Taylor Brands out of Seattle. And they are into cool housewares and specifically kitchen solutions. And I've had an opportunity in the past to work with the designers over there. And they actually have this very cool little studio up on 6th Street where they've got mad scientists in the world of everything from peelers to fruit polishers or whatever the market might bear. And they had this little thing that kind of ended up on my counter because I was making guacamole at a trade show and I've fallen in love with it. So everybody who asks, this is what they get: the avocado. It's a cutting tool for processing avocados. But I love it from as an example of really elegant design. Although it's a cutting tool, it's not very hard to cut an avocado, right? So sharpness isn't a premium. What is the design that you need to have to be able to do all those tasks from, removing the fruit to, getting that stubborn pit out of there and all that. And while there are knife techniques for all of that, it's a little bit of a daunting task when you have just a razor sharp knife and you're holding an avocado generally in your hand without a whole lot of protection as you go at it. So I've actually taken, even though I am a knife guy, I've taken my knives and set them aside. And whenever I'm processing avocados for this great little tool, the way it works is quite simply. It's got a very dull blade. I like to say it's taking dull to a higher level that can pierce the skin and kind of do that initial half cut that everybody needs to make. Then they've uniquely put like this little set of teeth in the center of it so you can quickly grab the stone or the pit out of there. And then with the flick of a wrist, just a little cutting loop scrapes out the fruit, and it's absolutely amazing. And I've, avocados and specifically guacamole is kind of a side hobby for me. And this tool just really makes it a lot of fun. So I thought I'd call it out. I just think it's very clever. And, for every function, there is a form that works best. And in the world of things that cut, it doesn't always necessarily equate to sharpness. Certainly that's the premium most of the time. But when you're in the kitchen and when, you're moving fast and doing real specific tasks, these things that are smartly designed to do those really, really well need to be, praised for what they are. And so that's one of my personal favorites.
And it's only $10.
And it's $10. How can you go wrong?
Yeah, right? Exactly. It looks great. It's interesting because you have worked with Alton Brown, and he is kind of decries what he calls unitaskers.
That's right.
That's kind of a disagreement that I have with him, because I have a few unitaskers, like a strawberry stem huller, that brings me joy every time I use it. And this kind of looks like one of those things that when you have an avocado, you kind of can't wait to pull this thing out and put it to use.
You're exactly right. And Alton would probably roll his eyes and admonish me seriously. But But you know, the thing with cooking is it needs to be fun. You know, I remember teaching my kids how to cook, and you know, even my wife, you know, trying to teach her knife skills. I've since given up. You know, they don't really want to hear it, right? And I think a good designer looks at the user, right, and designs a tool around that. And unfortunately, in the history, at least in my world, kitchen knife world, is it's we look at the manufacturability of a product, right, and we make it a certain way, and then over and over we say we try and teach people how to use it correctly. And I think that's getting it upside down. I've sort of come full circle on that and said, hey, use it how you want. I'll watch and try and make a better product. So this is a good example of that. But you're right,
Yeah.
Alton, he would not approve.
No, but we do. So speaking of cool design, and this is something that I've had some hands-on experience with and is really cool, is actually a Messermeister design. It's this knife block that just beautiful to look at. And tell us a little bit about it and how it works. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. You can say all the nice things about it as you like, because it is actually my design.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Very nice.
If you've so what we're talking about is the next level block. It's kind of looking at knife storage, in a really unique way, and in the topics today, as we kind of talk about these tools, we want to look at knives and not just, talk about metallurgy and different alloys and all, but really where the rubber meets the road. And that's, what do I do with this thing to keep it, looking and working and well protected like it was when I got it. So next level, was actually started, the development of that in 2018, which is pre-pandemic, and that'll be pertinent here in a second. Because, from my view, every time, if you envision the old traditional knife block that's got, slots cut into a chunk of walnut or beech or some other hardwood. And then you try and fill all those slots, and they're perfect for every knife, and it's good for one set. But what happens when you get another one, right? Or if, for me, I want to design a different blade that's maybe wider or longer or whatever, I kind of have to go back to the drawing board and redesign the block. And I did for years, right? It's sort of a bad way to go, right? So you couple that challenge with sort of this trend to have these clean kitchens, things that aren't artful and elegant. You take them all off the counter, and what you want are really showpiece things. And we make showpiece knives, right? And we want people to have the right frame around it. It's like the Mona Lisa. It's a nice painting, but it has that real fancy frame, so it's important. Even guys like me can recognize that. So I wanted to do that for our knives. And what we've got is essentially a wedge of layered magnetic platforms where each knife can sort of rest anywhere you want it to, in any configuration, up or down on the block, whatever, left side, right side, whether it's full or just got a few knives in it. It doesn't look awkward like something's missing. And so it's these ventilated platforms. And the real challenge with it is, when we look at sort of the functionality of it, the temptation is to put like this incredibly strong magnet in place, right? So you wrestle the knife off and then it kind of grabs it when it goes. But what I tried to do in this case was to, again, go sort of the other direction, using a lower strength magnetic rubber pad or a series of them, where the knife rests nice and softly without the block pulling it out of your hand. That's really good for the knives. It doesn't get them clanging around. It doesn't scratch them. And then when you go to retrieve the knife out of the block, it kind of releases and lets go nicely as well. The other important part about a ventilated design, and for those of you kind of like scratching your head, what I mean there is there's a magnetic platform and a big open space that is across the entire block, and then another platform, and so there's separation between each and every one of them. So you can see the knife, right? You can. It's a good looking piece on the counter, But it also avoids another really notable problem of the traditional knife block, which is that they've got these dark little slots that collect all kinds of crumbs and crud in them, and those are perfect places for historically bacteria to grow in your kitchen, and it's quite frankly it's kind of gross. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this allows you to have the open to the air. It dries much easier. And I said, well, as I'm going through and drawing this up, I said, you know what would be really, really cool? And so it is to integrate some additional cleaning light in there. And so we did put within the center spline of it has a bank of LED ultraviolet lighting and a little timer switch on the side. So you press it for 5 minutes and it floods the whole thing with disinfecting UV light. And again, remember, this is starting this in 2018. That wasn't as high a mind as it is now. Having something that's clean, a fresh approach, but really emphasize cleanliness in knife storage, as well as safety and beauty and its presentation. I think we can all be very proud of what we've put out here. It's called our next level block. Pardon the pun. Taking that light in there, put it to the next level.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I also noticed that it mirrors your logo.
It does. Yeah, a little bit, right? We go figure. Well, we like to get credit for all the hard work, but yeah, it's a stylish piece. Functions super well, and like we said before, it's intuitively simple, right? And that's that's more than half the battle in this case. I don't want you to have to worry too much about how to store the thing right, or work too hard to wrest your favorite knife out of the block.
That's cool. So tell us about some of your favorite knives that you like to put into this block.
Oh yeah. Oh man. So I'm somebody asked me recently, what knives have I bought recently? And quite honestly, I said, oh, geez, that's a terrible question to ask a knife maker because we don't buy knives. We're always looking for, we make them, right? If we have some wild idea, we make a knife and good or bad or otherwise, it's, we're always interested in what's next. And of late, I have been all about modern materials and lines, and our Kawashima knives are kind of the hottest thing going right now. And let me and I know this because I put one in my wife's hands, and she's always this guinea pig. I don't know if she knows this or not, but if she uses it, I'll leave it on the counter. If she picks it up and she uses it, and I find that she keeps going back to it, I know it's going to be commercially successful. We talked a little bit about design today, and sort of that concept of find the form that functions best, as opposed to sort of looking at what a chef's knife, for example, is supposed to look like, and then kind of adorning it from a basic knife shape to just a gilded basic knife shape. I don't think that's good design. The Kawashimas, what we did is I partnered with Shoichi Kawashima, who's a 6th generation Japanese knife maker. Guy's incredible. He's always, like me, trying to find a new and better way. And so we worked on the lines a little bit to create a high-handled knife that put your hands in a very comfortable position, had a long, deep rocker to the blade, and gave you a big tool that was incredibly light and almost disappeared in your hands. So, you look at something, you cut it. And we love the form of that. And it's not conventional by any stretch, but what you find is it just naturally encourages you to be in the right spot on the knife. And that was kind of the kickoff point. But then we said, okay, well, we're going to go crazy with modern design here. We have to use the newest, bestest modern materials. And what I'm always talking about these days is powdered steel. So when I say powdered steel, I get like these blank looks, or sometimes people nod and they think I'm talking about some kind of coating, but it's not that at all. It's what it is. You guys know powdered steel at all?
No, I don't. Tell us about it.
Okay, so generally and typically for hundreds of years, we've used wrought steel. You hear that, wrought like wrought
Hmm.
iron, and it's what you'd expect. It's a bunch of elements thrown into an alloy. It's heated up into some molten soup, and then it hardens. And generally there's some dude there smacking it with a hammer for some unknown reason, right, to shape the thing. And that's sort of the basis of the way steel, and specifically blade steel, has been for a long, long time. We actually have newer technologies these days. Believe it or not, we've come a long ways. And powdered steel is a little bit different. Um, with wrought steel, what happens is as you have this big molten chunk of steel or batch of steel, as it cools, it's got different elements in there. Carbon, most notably, to make it hard, right? Molybdenum and tungsten to hold it together, chromium to keep it bright. That's typically the recipe for stainless steel, and then maybe some other alloys that densify the steel or add toughness along the way. Well, those, like water and oil, they like to kind of pool together, and you'll get your carbon kind of chunking up over here and maybe over a little bit on the other side, and the gaps in between are where weak spots occur. And it's unavoidable. I mean, you can heat it up again and you can whack it with this big industrial hammer. That's what we call drop forging. And you can kind of pack them all in again. But there's a level of impurities that has always been acceptable. And by the way, those other elements that you add into the alloy, like chromium to make it bright, that actually softens the steel. So you're trying to add other elements in to counteract each and every one of those. And that's why you hear a lot of talk about these alloys. Well, powdered steel is totally different. And powdered steel starts with, a recipe like making a cake. And to use one of Alton Brown's analogies from long ago, we talk about making a cake. They're all basically flour, eggs, sugar, water, right? Mixed together in different proportions for different results. And you got angel food cake over here. It's nice and light and soft. You can have yellow cake somewhere in the middle, and powdered steel, and that's how steel is, right? But when we talk about powdered steel, you're really kind of jumping over to cheesecake. Yeah, we call it cake, but it's got very different properties entirely, and that's sort of the difference between wrought and powdered. So I know I'm rambling on, and thank you for allowing me to bore a much larger audience with my knife geek rambling. Usually, it's just isolated to the crowd at hand.
Right. So what you're saying is that you, instead of starting with molten steel, you start with some powdered form of it, and then you compress it. Do you do that for the whole knife or just for the edge?
Well, there are various techniques with it, but generally what you're doing is for the entire cutting surface. The goal is to have a much more pure and dense steel. The process, which is called the HIP process or hot isostatic pressing, is like this. You do start with different elements to create an alloy, and it's in a molten form, but that's dripped through a nitrogen atomizer, which essentially, as it drips through, that sort of blasts it into these little microscopic ball bearings, which are then sorted by size and the best ones, and then they're categorized and graded. The cool part about each and every one of those little microscopic ball bearings is that they're a perfect alloy. In other words, if I wanted, 1% chromium and, X% of this and of these others, each one of those ball bearings has that. And because it's been blasted with nitrogen, it's super cool, sort of flash frozen in place. It's a little bit smaller in its structure. What you get is, like, if you're taking your hands, and is like a talcum powder, but it's actually steel and it's heavy, and it's pure and it's dense in its form. And there's a few different processes to kind of make that back into a solid form. And what they do, though, they all about the same, is they put them in, they pack that powder in tightly, and then they heat it up under pressure in a neutral environment, and it's sintered back into a solid shape. But they do it below liquid phase, right? So that pooling that I talked about earlier, that doesn't occur. And the net result is that you've got incredibly dense. If you look at under an electron microscope, for example, you'll see typical plate steel, hot rolled, and then it's fairly loose in its structure. And then cold rolled a little bit better. Forged, you can tell it's been smashed and densified, but it all kind of looks like, an old weathered piece of wood, right, on its surface. When you look at powdered steel, what you see is super even grain that's just densely adhered to one another. There's no weak spot in between it. And without those weak spots, well, you can temper that all the way up to much higher hardness levels, which we measure in Rockwell in the knife world. And so what you end up with is a steel that's not only harder, which holds an edge much, much longer, but it actually is a little bit tougher in that it won't snap, or it won't, so you can keep it pliable, and it doesn't have that brittleness that we generally associate with hard steels. And that is kind of the holy grail, right, for a knife maker. You want to have that exquisite edge that kind of comes up and stays there, and you really don't have to do much to keep it. So that's really the secret. And our Kawashima knives, we went through all the trouble to go and do that. And what we've done, instead of using that really, really, you can imagine it's not cheap. So what we do is a little Japanese trick in cladding steels, they call kusumi steel, where you take maybe a less expensive but bright steel, and you put that on the outside of a center core of this super gold powdered steel, and so you kind of make a little steel sandwich out of it. That when you taper or grind the sides, that cutting edge is exposed. So no matter how you use that knife, all the way through to, if you were to, grind it away to a tiny little toothpick, you would always have the best cutting edge that money could buy. So with Kawashima, it's a long process, and I know it's a lot of metallurgy thrown in there, but the net result is
super interesting.
Yeah, light, fast, agile, and really the sharpest knife Messermeister's ever made. We're pretty proud of them.
Is that what leads to this really interesting edge that looks like, it's not like there's all sorts of contours and stuff.
Yeah, squiggly lines and polish and yeah. You know what? That's cool. Great question. What we do, right? So if we were to take that steel sandwich that I mentioned and we grind it, and then you, of course, you expose that cutting core down towards the edge. We polish the whole thing out at first, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's like a mirror finish, and you really can't see the separation. And we call that line a hamon line, right? And it's reminiscent of sort of the old samurai sword, where they'd wrap clay around that portion to temper the edge and the spine differently. Mm-hmm. Same process, by the way, the same concept of blade construction. Cool. But what we do, the reason why it shows up is that we'll then come through and we'll like they say sandblast, but media blast with the glass beads. And what it does is it kind of frosts out as those glass beads bounce and indent the steel. And you can it's a perfect literal expression of the difference between this powdered steel core and the softer jacket, and that it dents and frosts the once polished soft steel, but with the powdered steel core, it just bounces right off, so it stays mirror polished, and you see that line of embarkation between the two metals.
It's a great look.
Yeah, thanks. There's, you got to show the technology, because not everybody's going to run a 5-minute dissertation on the construction of the blade, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so the knife sharpening machine you mentioned earlier would work on these blades as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I hear a lot where, people talk about, harder steel is harder to sharpen. Well, that's not exactly true. It does require a different setup. And that's why, the work sharp sharpener has a huge advantage. So generally you would want a harder, or rather a slower belt moving, and a little bit finer belt to sharpen these. And you can dial that right in. Change the belt out, slow it down, and it's ready to go. Actually, hard steels, from my perspective, are much easier to sharpen if I have that variability. Most of the knife sharpeners out there, like Kevin's at home, right, is just one size fits all. And most of the knives in the world, quite honestly, are not really great knives. So if you're going to make a sharpener that's one size fit all, you're going to kind of dial it in for not really great knives, because that makes sense. But if you want to sharpen, something that's really, really hard steel, you need a machine that has versatility. And I always tell people that look at me funny when I say hard steels are easier to sharpen, but I'll prove it to you. We're going to prove it to each other today, right? To use another, I already talked about steel is like cake, right? Now, so we're going to talk about knives are like cheese. And if I gave you, each a block of cheese, one of you has, a real nice hard brick of Parmesan, and the other one's got like this soft Colby, right? That kind of wiggles back and forth. You got a rasp in your hand. Your goal is to create the perfectly smooth, fine edge peak out of the top of the thing. What's going to be easier? It's going to be the one that resists, right? It's that Parmesan which you can carve and shape, and the other one's going to kind of move away from you, and it's not going to be easy to get a nice, clean, even edge on that thing, no matter what you do.
Right.
And steel is exactly the same way. But you better have the right tool to do the work. Because it isn't one size fits all, and the baker matters in this case, not just the ingredients. Yeah,
that's so cool.
That's why there's no gold knives, because gold is so soft.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that's also why I one of the things one of our other chefs, Adam Glick, I was on the phone with him yesterday, and he was kind of bemoaning the fact that some of his favorite knives, he does a lot of saltwater fishing. He says, "Oh, they corrode," he says, and then there's rust on them. And I said, "Yes, and there better be." And he says, "I know." And what we're talking about is, if you have a knife that has a lot of chromium in it to protect it from a salty environment, well, that's going to soften the steel, and so it never holds an edge. And so fishermen are always after me, like, "Can't you make a great hard steel that doesn't doesn't rust?" I'm like, no, but I will tease you guys a little bit. There is something coming. Trust me.
Well, that sounds good. Well, Mark, unfortunately, we are up against time. We have another guest that we need to talk to, so we didn't get a chance to talk about you restoring your dad's Willie's Jeep. Yeah. We will have to have you back on the show to talk more about knives, because to me, it's fascinating hearing about knives, and you are a wealth of knowledge about that. It's been so great having you on the show. Thank you so much. Thank
you guys again for having me. I'm glad I didn't put you to sleep. I know I can ramble on, but
it's fascinating.
Knives are fun. Hey,
they're great. Thank you.
Very fascinating.
It's a cool gig. They pay me to play with knives, and they haven't figured out that I love it. So I'm going to keep it going.
That sounds great. And so the place to go to find out about the knives that Mark makes is Messermeister.com. That's MESSERMEISTER.com. We'll also have a link to that on the show notes at cool-tools.org. Once again, Mark, thank you so much.
You bet. Happy Friday, guys, and everybody have a great weekend.
Hey, everybody, it's your host, Mark, and I wanted to thank you for listening to the Cool Tools Show. And I also wanted to let you know that we've got a lot more going on at Cool Tools than just this podcast. We also have the Cool Tools website, which has a new tool review every day, and you can get there by going to cool-tools.org. We also have 4 different newsletters that you can subscribe to, and you can subscribe to those from the Cool Tools page. We have this podcast that you're listening to right now. We also have a YouTube channel where we review tools. Check that YouTube channel out by going to youtube.com/cooltools. And one of the things I'd like to ask you is, if you're really enjoying everything that we are producing, go to our Patreon page and support us there. You can sign up and give us as little as $1 a month, and that would mean a lot to us. The money that we get from Patreon goes towards a lot of things. We transcribe our podcast interviews so that you can read them online. We pay for editing of our podcasts and for our videos. We pay our contributors. We have video production costs. We have equipment costs. We have hosting costs. And the money you give us through Patreon also goes to support Cool Tools Lab. Anything you give is a huge help. And one of the things that we do is, if you are a contributor to Patreon, we'll give you a shout out on air. And so I have a few people here to thank this week. Mark Lyanaj, Micah Gates, Monty Zukowski, Patrick James McNally, Robert Cohen, Scott, Spence Lloyd, Steve Avery, Steve Golden, Steve Levine, Tom Hess, William Phillips, Aaron Nipper, Darab Patel, Glenn Mercer, Jay Walker, Jeff Bonner, Ryan Jarrell, Pat Daly, Patrick Kennedy, Troy Wallet, Mike Camerate, Nicole Harkin, Tim Youssef, Scott Reed. Thanks all of you for supporting Cool Tools. And if you would like to have a shout out, go over to the Patreon page and sign up. And thanks for listening to the Cool Tools podcast. We'll see you next week.